Really was a bye series of by-elections as voters said goodbye to two Conservative candidates. Runs through some of the records that have been set or smashed. So these are two five-figure majorities overturned, a swing of 28.5%. That's the second largest in any party that's suffered since World War II. They've now lost more by-elections than any single government since the 1960s. With that rather gloomy record, what now for the Conservative Party? Well, let's go to each of the constituencies. First to Henry Riley. He's in Kettering for the Wellingborough count and joins me now.
Nick, this once solidly blue Conservative seat of Wellingborough has now turned red. The 10th seat the Tories have lost at a by-election since the last general election, and the 6th they've lost to Labour as a huge 18,500 Conservative majority came tumbling down just a few hours ago.
Habib Binyamin Naim, also known as Ben Habib, Reform UK, 3,919 votes. Harrison Helen Jane, the Conservative Party candidate, 7,408 votes. Kitchen Genevieve Victoria, also known as Jen Kitchen, Labour Party, 13,844 votes.
Jen Kitchen, a 28-year-old charity worker, is the new MP for the North Northamptonshire seat. In her victory speech, she said this was a clear message to the government.
This is a stunning victory for the Labour Party and must send a message from Northamptonshire to Downing Street. People here are patriotic and hopeful for our country, and they care about our community. But they know that our roads aren't fit to drive on, getting your child a doctor's appointment can seem impossible, and that they are paying more and getting less. Today, they said, enough is enough.
Some within the Conservative Party hierarchy are frustrated at their choice of candidate here. Helen Harrison, a local councillor, is the partner of the previous MP, Peter Bone, who was suspended from the House of Commons for 6 weeks after an independent panel found multiple counts of bullying and one of sexual misconduct against a member of his staff, something he denies. And even Rishi Sunak failed to endorse her campaign. But this poses two problems for the Conservatives. Firstly, that after a difficult 2 weeks for Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour Party not only won, but achieved the second biggest post-war swing from the Conservatives to Labour of 28.5%. And secondly, that Reform UK, who was the Brexit party, didn't stand here in 2019, are now actively targeting the Conservatives. They got their best ever election result of 13%, doubling their previous record. The party's candidate here and deputy leader, Ben Habib, told me he had this message for Conservative MPs.
My message is, if you're genuine small C Conservatives, you believe in lower taxes for the working middle class, lower taxes on businesses, deregulating the economy so that businesses can thrive and prosper, if you believe in preventing the undercutting of the British workforce by rampant immigration, if you actually want to enforce our territorial integrity and stop the boats, either get your party to reform or join reform.
Labour now have a near 6,500 majority here in Wellingborough to defend when voters go back to the polls later this year at a general election. And it wasn't the only seat the Conservatives tried and failed to defend overnight. LBC's Makin-Isherwood has been at the count in Kingswood.
And the sun is coming up in Kingswood now, shining on a massive poster of the Labour candidate Damien Egan's face. And he will be celebrating today after taking victory in Kingswood, snatching this constituency from the Conservatives. This by-election came about after the resignation of Chris Skidmore, a former Clean Energy Minister who resigned in protest over the government's decision to go forward with annual licences for extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea. But Damien Egan came out on top. He, in his victory speech, said that he had spoken to people in Kingswood, knocked on thousands of doors and thanked them for putting their trust in him. He said that he had kept his campaign rooted in issues that impact the community, and he was working with frankness and honesty. But, of course, there is the other side to this, isn't there? The loss of the Conservatives. Their candidate moved out of the back door pretty quickly of the Leisure Centre after the final declaration of that count was put forward and made public. But Jacob Rees-Mogg was left answering questions from journalists. Just before that final declaration was made, we had this sense that it had not gone well for the government, for the Conservatives in this area. But Jacob Rees-Mogg seemed to try to detract from that and say this wasn't actually an indication of what's to come in any general election.
Well, it was a seat that was won by the Conservatives in 2010. It was a Labour seat. When Labour was in government, it was a Labour seat with a comfortable majority. And by-elections are very volatile. The history of by-elections is one of volatility over recent decades.
So Jacob Rees-Mogg trying to explain away this kind of result, but Labour were clearly jubilant. And Chris Bryant, a Labour MP, was here in support in this area. He said that this success was all about the campaign that Damien had carried out, had done all that door knocking. And clearly he was feeling positive about what might come when that general election is eventually called.
I can hear all the excuses the Tories will come up with now. They'll say, oh, it's just a by-election, it doesn't mean anything. This is a seat that the Labour Party has held in the past. Not true, actually. It was a different configuration of the seat as well. But look, the truth is, massive swing to Labour here. It doesn't mean that we will definitely win the next election, but this is the first domino to be toppled. And I hope there'll be many more dominoes that will topple later on this year.
So the Labour Party will be rejoining one another now, looking ahead to a general election, trying to put, of course, that manifesto together and continue with this momentum. The Conservatives will also be having to have conversations back at HQ and try to work out how they might be able to swing these seats when that general election does come.
Henry Riley and then Laura Makin-Isherwood reporting. Let's pick up with that theme from Chris Bryant, Labour's Chris Bryant there, what the Conservative reaction will be, with Lionel Barber. Now, Lionel edited the Financial Times for 15 years. He's now an author, broadcaster, and co-hosts the podcast Media Confidential and joins me now. Let's put aside the immediate reaction of the Conservative. What might we see over the coming weeks and months that are left, do you think, Lionel? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. We'll see a lot of talk about stopping the votes and pushing that immigration button because there's not much left on the Conservative agenda. They'll also obviously try and say that the economy is improving. What's interesting, of course, is that the last data were not good. And there's a story in the Telegraph, I'm sure you read it at 5 o'clock in the morning, that they're dropping the proposed tax cut of income tax cut of 2p because of the state of public finances. That's very telling.
Reminding the listeners how long you were at the helm of the FT, what do you take from the figures yesterday showing we go into what's called a technical recession, Lionel?
Well, I think it's just the sense that things were getting better. There would be an early rate cut by the Bank of England. I interviewed the governor last summer, and he was just cautiously optimistic that things were improving. Didn't want to move too quickly. Clearly, inflation in this country is more embedded than else. I mean, if you look at the United States, they're in a much better shape. So people's incomes are not improving. The economy's not growing. There are deep-rooted problems. And the fact is, Nick, this Conservative government, successive prime ministers coming in and out the door, a disunited party, they're not being capable of actually answering the question, how do you restore growth and make people feel better?
Lastly, what might be a hurdle that lies between Labour and electoral victory at a general election later this year? Issues such as possibly anti-Semitism, Lionel.
It's an issue, but it's not going to be decisive. I think on that, what happened in the last couple of weeks is just raising questions about, well, has Keir Starmer really rooted it out? And therefore, can we take him at face value as a very strong leader? But I think the momentum is with Labour, and we're looking at another government. And by the way, there are so many Conservatives who are either leaving politics, cabinet ministers putting out their CVs in the city. This is a sign of a party, it's the fag end of the government, Nick.
Yeah, the talent puddle has been drained, I think.